Hello and welcome back to Chillers and Thrillers, the paranormal podcast where I read true stories of people's encounters with the strange and unexplained. No comedy, gore, or skepticism, only 100% true spooky tales. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank a few listeners. First, thank you to Eddie from Pennsylvania and Grant from the UK for emailing me and complimenting the podcast. It was so nice to hear directly from listeners. Also, thank you to Maddie Donuts and Calgary Guy 2024 for your kind reviews in the Apple Podcasts. And lastly, thank you to Kate, Adette, Scoobs, and Anthea for your supporting comments about the podcast on the Spotify episodes. I sincerely appreciate hearing from all of you. When I was 13, the 1973 horror classic The Exorcist was re-released in movie theaters in honor of the movie's 25th anniversary and included scenes the book's author, William Peter Blatty, wished had been included in the original release. This was one of the first non-slasher horror movies I watched in theaters, and to say I was terrified would be an understatement, but I was also hooked. My love for ghosts and paranormal stories had never treaded the territory of demons or demonic possessions, and a new fear was unlocked in me. If you haven't read the book yet, please do. It's one of my favorite horror books. Now, in honor of October being Spooky Month, and as a build-up to Halloween, this episode's theme will be based on one of the oldest and most terrifying paranormal entities, demons and demonic possessions. I don't think you even need to be particularly religious to feel your hair stand on end whenever you hear a story of a demon or demonic entity and the chaos it can create in someone's life. Different religions and cultures have varying theories on demons and classifications of them as well. For example, in Christianity, many people believe that demons, and in particular Lucifer, are fallen angels who fell out of God's grace, and they may cause disease, temptation, possessions, or other forms of harms to human. In Indigenous and Native American culture, there are similar evil entities who thrive on chaos, sadness, and despair. Some people believe that demons fall into hierarchies, with the most powerful ones being able to create more destruction in a person's life. But let's not waste too much time discussing the hierarchies and get into the stories. So get comfortable, turn down the lights, grab some holy water, and listen in. My encounter with a demon, submitted by Anonymous. When I was 14, I had a strange encounter that still puzzles me to this day. On the weekends, I'd sometimes go to my mother's place since my parents were divorced. The house she lived in was converted into several small apartments. It was a creepy old farmhouse, with the house being at least 150, maybe 200 years old. My mom told me of on and off strange sounds she'd been hearing and seeing things in the corner of her eyes, and the general feeling of being watched. This one particular evening, when I spent the night, I brought my N64 because my mom would go to bed early and I would still be up for a few more hours. I still remember to this day what game I was playing. WWF No Mercy. I was sitting Indian style on the floor, playing the story mode. I just finished a mission in the game and set down the controller to the left and behind me. Directly behind me was a recliner, and I'll never forget what I saw next. I went to grab the controller and saw what appeared to be a hoof, like a horse, next to the controller on the floor. Insects and blood was coming out of the sliver that separated the hoof. I thought to myself, how strange. I slowly glanced up, and this demonic figure was staring back at me. It leaned down towards me, its face got down in my face, and it grinned the most evil smile. The eyes were black, the face was red. Blood was dripping from its teeth. It was so surreal, I immediately went into a panic attack and blacked out. I learned later that was due to the fight or flight response. A short while later, I came to, lying on the floor. I could barely move. The demonic figure was sitting in the chair laughing at me, as if my fear and energy had been sucked dry from me. I lost all strength. I did all I could do to crawl to my mom's room and woke her up. After I woke her up, we talked and she believed me. She told me she too had seen the same thing earlier that week, but didn't want to scare me. I don't know what to make of it and still think of it to this day. I have no doubt demons and angels are real, and believe me, the last thing you ever want to encounter is a demon smiling in your face. I don't care if you believe me or not, but when two people see the same thing on two separate occasions, either we're both crazy or something was wrong with that old farmhouse. My mom has thankfully moved, and we haven't encountered that thing since. I think my dog saved me from a demon. Submitted by user ScottVenom256. When I was around 10 years old, I would sleepwalk every single night. This lasted until I was about 14. I'd go to bed upstairs and wake up downstairs on the couch with my dog next to me. One time, I woke up in our back garden on a bench we had. On one particular night, when I was about 13, I had the strangest experience I can remember, and judging from other posts, could have been a demon encounter. I was lying in bed half asleep when I heard 3 of the faintest knocks on the front door downstairs. I don't know how I heard it, but my bedroom was at the front of the house, so maybe that's how. I think I looked at the clock and it was around 3:15 a.m. When I got up, my dog followed me downstairs to the front door. I opened it and saw a little girl. She had to be around 5 or 6 years old. She had bright blue eyes, brown hair that was really short, and I couldn't make out many other details about her face, because it was really dark that night. But the faint glow of the streetlights seemed to make her eyes a bright shade of blue. I didn't recognize her from my school, nor from the neighborhood. I had never seen her before in my life. I remember being confused as to why she was at the door, but before I could say anything, she asked, "Can I come in?" As she asked, she stepped closer, almost into the house. And that's when my dog saw her and started growling. A little bit about my dog for context. He was a rescue Springer Spaniel called Benji, and the most gentle boy ever. He never barked or growled at anything unless he was trapped somewhere. The sanctuary we rescued him from said he was probably hit when he barked or growled, so that's why he never did it. He would cry after he barked or growled because he was scared he'd get hit. He was an amazing, gentle boy who I miss so much. Benji snarled and growled at this girl and started backing up like he was going to attack her. I had never seen Benji this angry, ever. All I remember saying to her is, "No, you can't come in. Sorry, but you're upsetting Benji." She said, "Okay," and just turned around and walked away. I closed and locked the door, turned around, and Benji was wagging his tail. I looked out the curtains just a couple of seconds after closing the door, and I couldn't see her anywhere. Like she just vanished. My house had views across a lot of the neighborhood, and there was nowhere she could have gone that fast that would be out of sight from the window. After that night, Benji started sleeping with me right by my bedroom door, as if to block me from sleepwalking again. Even though he had his own bed in my room next to my bed, he would sleep on the floor inside my room, right in front of the door. I'm 26 now, but still remember the encounter to this day. I don't know if it was a demon that night or what it was, but I feel like Benji was protecting me from something. Vanquishing the Crazy Clown. Submitted by Anonymous. I don't call myself clairvoyant or anything special, but I swear on my parents' and grandparents' graves that this is true. My mentor is an old-time medicine man who has practiced for over 60 years. Most people wouldn't think much of him, just that he's old and a bit eccentric, but he doesn't care what anyone thinks. I once met a coworker whose brother and son had both taken their lives within days of each other. 2 years prior, his niece had also attempted this, and though she survived, she passed away in a drunk driving accident shortly later. This man was terrified of losing more family members, and no one on his reservation could help. When he mentioned this to me, I brought it to my mentor. We visited my coworker's house to assess the situation and planned to return that night, when the evil ones were most active. Before facing anything dark, my mentor fasts, prays to the Creator and all the good forces in the universe, and gives thanks to those who stand with us against evil. He transforms during his preparation. He becomes someone else entirely. He instructed me to pray and cast out any fear, as we would be facing something powerful and malevolent. That night, we went back to the house. My mentor told me to keep an eye on the family while he ventured into a nearby field. It was pitch dark, and he disappeared for what felt like hours. I started to worry, but when he finally returned, he simply said, "Tomorrow night, we'll wait down the road." The next day, we prayed, fasted, and prepared. Medicine people see two worlds, and those of us who assist them must understand the existence of other realms. Late that night, we positioned ourselves off the road to avoid being seen by passing cars. My mentor motioned for me to stay behind him. We crouched in a ditch and waited. I felt that my mentor knew exactly what he was looking for, though I was clueless. Eventually, the road went quiet, and we saw dim lights approaching from the left. My mentor leaped out of the ditch and stood by the road, with me behind him. The lights came from an old black car, either a Cadillac or a Lincoln Continental, but it wasn't a limo. I noticed the car had no doors, and the motor didn't sound like any engine I'd ever heard. As a mechanic, I've heard plenty of engines, but this didn't sound mechanical. It was eerie, not of this world. What happened next chilled me to the core. The car stopped, and dust kicked up around it, as if it were trying to hide. My mentor walked over to the passenger side, and I peeked over his shoulder. The windows had no glass, and though the car was running, I couldn't smell gas, oil, or exhaust. Instead, there was a stench, something like death. Inside the car sat a figure dressed as a clown, with messy orange hair, a white face, and a sinister smile. It looked like the Joker, with dirty, ragged ruffles around its neck. It wasn't a man. I don't know what it was, but it radiated pure evil. I could barely look at it, and its presence was hypnotic. It took every ounce of strength to break free from its gaze. My mentor, closer to it than I was, didn't look at it. He reached into the back seat where several figures sat, whimpering. The dead. My senses went numb. I couldn't hear, smell, or feel anything. It was like I was floating. My mentor reached in, pulled something out, and waved his hand over the passengers, praying. I watched as the figures floated out of the back window and up into the sky, disappearing among the stars. My mentor then pulled out a rope with a noose. He showed it to me, and I immediately felt like I was choking. The clown figure began laughing, a wicked, cackling sound that made my throat burn. I fell to my knees, gasping for air. My mentor placed a hand on my shoulder, praying for me, and handed me a Bible and a cloth. As I pressed the cloth to my stomach, I felt as though I might vomit. But after a few moments, my body relaxed and I could breathe again. As the clown's laughter turned into a horrific scream, the car began to emit smoke, reeking of alcohol, blood, burning flesh, and cigarettes. My mentor had been right. This was pure evil, and it took everything we had to confront it. The car vanished with the rising sun, and my mentor sang an old song as we walked back to my coworker's house. Inside, he explained to the man what had been afflicting his family. The man revealed that many of his relatives had died in car wrecks, suicides, and from diseases like cancer and alcoholism. My mentor advised the man to move away and live a good life. Exhausted, I slept for 2 days straight. When I woke, I was starving, realizing I hadn't eaten in 3 days. We continued to work together, but we never took any money for our help. The only payment we asked for is that people live righteously and follow the good ways. Since that night, no one in the man's family has died tragically again. I share this story with my mentor's permission. He believes people need to know what the dead find out too late. Hiking in the UK. Submitted by user Chadco888. So me and my partner went hiking to a place in central UK called Shropshire. We were walking up to the peak of the hill that is scattered with giant 50 to 60 foot rock formations and small rocks all piled in mound. Google Devil's Chair and you can understand. It was early morning. The sun was rising, but the area was fully lit and we were all alone. She was behind me, struggling to keep up, and I was looking down to watch where she's walking, so she didn't see a thing. I looked ahead, and on the leftmost mound of rocks, there was what I thought was a person. I admit I was a little ticked off to have to say begrudgingly good morning to a complete stranger when all I wanted was tranquility. Suddenly, this person bent forward and put all fours on the ground, but not bent in half. It had a full U-shaped bend like a rainbow. That's when I realized the person wasn't wearing any clothes. And then it moved, and I can't describe how it moved. Almost like a centipede with precise agility over the rock formations. I was terrified and I ran ahead to see what the hell that thing was. I have never seen an animal in my life walk that way, but it had gone without a trace. And when I reached the rocks, I realized that it stood about 7 to 8 feet tall on its hind legs. Safe to say I was on edge the whole hike. Getting back to my car was an absolute nightmare. Since then, I've researched the folklore of the stripper stones. Apparently, it was created when the devil was crossing the UK with stones, and his bag broke and spilled all the stones. So he crafted them into a chair and decided that every year, on the longest night, he would come back to Earth and sit in his chair. Every year on that longest night, people who believe in witchcraft come to perform rituals and summon demons. That night finishes on the 22nd of December, and I was there at sunrise, which had brought an end to that night. Have you ever seen God? Submitted by user the-palmist. This happened in 2016 when I accompanied my paternal uncle to Goddess Vinhavasini temple located in Uttar Pradesh, one of the major seat of the goddesses in India. My aunt had been stuck in labor for quite a while, and someone suggested that she may have fallen victim to a tantric ritual that causes delay in childbirth. My uncle knew a priest in the temple who was considered to be adept in occult scientist and had reached out to him for help. We met the priest, who was dressed in a modest saffron robe and had an air of humbleness around him. I could not even suspect anything about what was about to happen in the next few hours. He confirmed that someone had done a Masani Kriya, a graveyard ritual, on my aunt, and if not reversed within time, it could end up in miscarriage or even death. We were horrified and could not believe what was being told to us, but he assured us that she could be saved provided we start the yagya, the ceremonial fire, and other rituals on time. So, on the banks of the river Ganges, he lit a ceremonial fire and asked us to keep putting oblations into the fire when told. The ritual went on for quite a while, when the strangest thing I've ever experienced in my life happened. Suddenly, scores of subhuman creatures started coming from nowhere and began sitting around us in a circle. I cannot describe exactly how they looked, but all of them were stunted and had deformed legs or hands, with pus oozing out of their wounds. They looked very similar to humans, but there was something otherworldly about them that I can't put my finger on. Now, my uncle is a very serious and grumpy guy, you know the kind, and with the situation at hand, wasn't in a good mood that day. I could see he thought that those creatures were beggars and was telling them to bugger off. But the priest, who seemed unfazed by the bizarre situation, put a finger to his lips and gestured him to remain quiet. As the ritual was about to end, the creatures disappeared as strangely as they had arrived. After the ritual ended, the priest asked for a bit more time to dispose of the residue of the yagya into the Ganges. Meanwhile, my uncle and I toured the entire temple to find out where those creatures could have gone, but this was in vain. When the priest returned, I asked him about what we had just seen. He explained that the spirits that were being used to torment our aunt had arrived to distract us from the ritual. Like humans, they are also attached to the earth and do not want to cross over. Had any one of us reacted or got up from our place, the ritual would have failed and our aunt would be doomed. This was the reason he had gestured us to remain calm. Curiosity arose in my mind and I asked, "Have you ever seen God?" "No, but I have seen the devil," he said. I was bewildered to hear this because, apart from the obvious version of the devil himself, Satan is predominantly a Christian spirit, and the priest was an Orthodox Hindu. Moreover, the concept of Satan, Lucifer, Shaitan does not exist in Hinduism. Before I became a priest, I was a Vamachari, left-hand tantric, and had once got a chance to perform a ritual in an abandoned Christian graveyard. The specifics of the ritual are arcane, but you have to write a mantra on a piece of paper and make a wick out of it. The wick is then placed in an oil lamp and set alight. During midnight, 11 rounds of the mantra are to be recited in the graveyard while the wick is burning. Now, these demons do not like anyone trying to gain power over them and will do anything possible to distract from the ritual. Sometimes you'll see maidens wearing diaphanous garments strutting around the graveyard and hear their anklets tinkling. At other times, you'll hear the voices of your family screaming for help, babies crying, and other hallucinations. If you sit steadfast, perform the ritual for 21 continuous days, and do not get distracted, the Prince of Demons, Satan himself, comes on the last day and begs for the oil left in the lamp. Describe Satan as being black, extremely hairy with horns, and walks with his hands and feet to the ground like an animal. he also makes a coo-coo sound. This part is extremely treacherous, since it's a trap laid out by Satan to distract the practitioner. You have to give the oil to Satan, after which Satan will tempt you to ask for anything you want. If at this point you ask for something, be it riches, women, or what have you, or refuse to give the oil, you are doomed and will have to suffer from lunacy throughout the remainder of your miserable life. The only acceptable request is to ask Satan to leave you alone so you can complete your ritual in peace. Once the ritual is complete, you'll gain the ability to exorcise any demon with ease. Suddenly, my uncle's mobile rang. It was a midwife calling to inform him that his son had been delivered safely. I wish I could tell you that the attacks on my aunt ceased after this event, but they didn't. In the years following, my uncle would sometimes find pieces of bones, dog bones tied rapidly in red cloth scattered around the precarious corners of the house. But that is another story. And that's all for this episode. But fear not, dear listener. As I've mentioned various times before, Halloween is my favorite holiday, and there's nothing I like to do more than to listen to spooky stories, read scary books, and watch horror movies during the lead-up to this special day. So, I would be remiss to not have a part 2 for this episode in celebration of Halloween and as a thank you to you all for your continued support. So join me again in 1 week for part 2 of True Tales of People Who Encountered Demons or Demonic Entities. In the meantime, what are your thoughts? Do you think demons or demonic entities are true? As always, if you have any stories, theories, or just general comments, let me know. Until we meet again, I hope all you ghouls and ghosts stay safe, and I'll see you soon.